Okay. So today I'm going to be giving a talk on the work that I started with Jonathan Tan and Sven Van Loo and Elizabeth Tasker at the University of Florida last year when I was finishing my PhD. And I'll also be talking about some projects that I started with Roman Tessier at Zurich since I started there last year. So this talk will be about basically the structure and dynamics of filaments and clumps in giant molecular clouds in this context of Kiloparsec-Scale simulations of disk galaxies. So I'll start by talking about our simulation setup, how we extracted our kiloparsec region from a global galaxy simulation, and basically run it to higher resolution. And we'll be selecting a sample of filaments from this simulation, looking at the structure and the kinematics and dynamics. And we have a number of different quantities and figures we can generate that we can then compare to observations. And finally, I'll end by commenting briefly on what role we expect magnetic fields and radiative feedback to have on our results. So our simulation is extracted from this global disk galaxy simulation that Elizabeth Tasker ran in 2009 using ENSO. So we selected a 1 kiloparsec region that contains a number of interacting GMCs. So here I show the zoomed in view of the region we selected. So there's 6 individual clouds that we've identified. So we basically subtract the circular velocity from this region and add in a shear flow. So we add the shear that goes up on this side and basically down on this side. So we set up basically a pseudo shearing box. So we include molecular cooling function that we've generated using Cloudy that we describe in detail in Sven Van Loo's 2013 paper. And we include star formation at a fixed rate per freefall time. And so we run this region for 4 million years. And on the left here, I show the initial conditions along the density projections along the X, Y, and Z axes. The middle column shows the results at 0.1 parsec resolution, not including star formation, and on the right we include star formation, and the star particles are shown with these white dots. And I'll explain what these square regions are in a couple slides. We also show the mass-weighted mean hydrogen number density for the top-down view of the no star formation and star formation runs, and the mass-weighted mean temperature. So the densest clumps get down to about the order of 10 to 20 Kelvin, with the clouds being more on the order of a couple hundred Kelvin. So the main goal of our paper is to explore the properties of filaments. So we select a sample of 4 representative filaments. So these are 50 parsec cubes centered on filaments that we've basically defined by eye, selecting things that look most similar to observed filaments in the galaxy. And during this talk, I'll summarize the results for 3 different methods that we've chosen of defining what exactly a filament is, and we also define envelope regions. So at the smallest scale, we have what we call the inner filament. So we divide each 50 parsec long filament into 10 strips. The inner filament, we do 5 by 5 by 5 parsec strips. These are iteratively centered on the local center of mass, and we define the envelope as basically half the volume on each end of this strip. And then on the larger scale, we define the outer filament, which is 5 by 10 by 10 parsec, with the envelope defined in the same way. And we also consider only looking at the dense gas in the inner filament region. And in this case, we define the filament to be the gas above 10 to the 3 hydrogens per cc, with the envelope being defined as the gas below this threshold. And here I show some of the structural properties of the 50 parsec cubed regions. So we have masses typically of a few times 10 to the 5, and we have the mean velocities and velocity dispersions included as well. So this figure shows our filament samples. So these are the projections through each 50 parsec cubed region from left to right, filaments A, B, C, and D. And these rectangles, the large ones, define the outer filament region that I discussed, and the smaller ones are the inner filament. So for the side-on view, we just select basically the best looking axis for our analysis. So for filament A, it happens to be the y-axis, and the rest are along the x-axis, and that's the axis along which we'll be looking at the structure and kinematics. So to start at the largest scale, looking at the structure, one way we can examine this is by using column density probability distribution functions. And I show these PDFs for each of the filaments. So the whole 50 parsec region is shown in blue, with the solid line being the top-down projection, and the dotted and dashed lines, the two in-plane projections. And the red lines show a smaller 25 parsec cubed region centered on the center of mass of the box. So this was just to examine the effect of basically how we define the filament region. And I also plot the observed column density PDF of an infrared dark cloud from some of my mid-infrared extinction mapping work. So basically what we see is power law tail. So what these PDFs can tell us is basically it's been shown that the presence of a power law tail indicates that the cloud is currently undergoing star formation, whereas non-star forming clouds basically don't exhibit this power law tail. So for all of our filaments, we do see this power law tail at the end. And we just note that the boundary of the PDF region does seem to have a significant effect on the results. But in general, we see roughly similar, in some cases, PDFs to the observations. So we can also look at the structure along the filaments. So we measure the mass per unit length in each of the 3 regions, in each of the 4 regions with the 3 different cases of outer, inner, and dense filaments. So I show these profiles here for each filament, with the black lines representing the outer filament, red representing inner, and blue represents the dense gas. And the histogram shows the mean value in each of these 10 strips. So we observe basically a mean mass per unit length of a few thousand solar masses per parsec, with very large dispersions in the strips that contain clumps. So these are about a factor of 10 higher than values typically observed in IRDCs, which are typically between 1 and 500 solar masses per parsec. So we think these filaments are undergoing an unrealistically high degree of fragmentation to quite high densities, because we don't have any feedback or magnetic fields to inhibit that collapse. But the peaks in those mass per unit length profiles correspond to dense clumps, and they're formed by fragmentation of the filament. So in gravitationally bound filaments, it's predicted that these clumps or cores will form at roughly regular intervals. So to see whether our filaments agree with this, we can define a sample of clumps using this clump finding routine built into YT. So we find a total of about 34 clumps in all 4 filaments, and we use a density threshold of 10 to the 5 hydrogens per cc, and we find a mean separation of each clump to its nearest neighbor of just over 6 parsecs. And this is on the high end of the range seen in large filaments in our galaxy, for example, the Nessie Nebula from Jim Jackson's work. So this is just a short movie of the last million years of the simulation of one of our filaments. So you can see that these clumps are roughly uniformly distributed along the filament. So moving on to the lateral structure of the filament, we can construct the mass or column density profiles across the filament, and we show this for each strip, for each filament in this figure. The main thing to take away from this is due to the presence of the dense clumps, it's difficult to determine what the filament width is, which has been shown to be an important quantity in determining the conditions under which the filaments have formed. So typically, the observed filaments from this Arzumanian et al. Paper are around 1/10 of a parsec. So of course, we can't resolve structures down to that level, but we can make a rough estimate of the filament widths that we do see using a variety of different methods. But the presence of these clumps makes it difficult to make an accurate measurement of these quantities. So moving on to the kinematics, here I show again the mass-weighted hydrogen density for each filament, and overplotted are the velocity vectors in the center of mass frame of each region. And we can use this velocity information to, for example, construct position velocity diagrams. So here I show the whole region, all 10 strips, where the outer filament is black dots and the inner is red on this top row. And we decompose that into near and far side regions in red and blue for each filament. And then we show the results at various density thresholds from 10 to the 2 to 10 to the 5 hydrogens per cc. So we can see, basically what we conclude from this is that the observed, or the velocity ranges we're seeing are very high, up to about 60 kilometers a second, and the velocity dispersions in the dense gas are also very high. We can also look at the velocity spectra, and I show the spectrum for each strip in filament A, in the outer, inner, and dense regions. So we can see some evidence, for example, in this strip of infall onto the filament, where the red and blue are, again, the near and far side. And we can also measure, for example, velocity gradients. So we find gradients of 0.2 of a kilometer per second per parsec on the 50 parsec scale. And going to the smaller strip scale, we find values about a half, which are factors of a few higher than what are the values typically seen in galactic filaments. So finally, we can also look at the dynamics of the filament by assessing the filamentary virial state. So this is the equation from Feig and Pudgeritz 2000, where we have the surface pressure divided by the internal pressure with the mass per unit length over the virial mass per unit length. And this is a magnetic term, which in our simulation goes away since we don't have magnetic fields. So the virial mass per unit length is defined as this, with the sigma being the velocity dispersion in the filament. And in our units, this ratio of pressures is given by these quantities. And on this figure, I show where each strip lies on this Vigen-Pudritz diagram, where the solid triangles are the dense gas only, the solid squares are the inner filament, and the open squares are the outer filament. Generally, what we see is most strips have mass per unit length less than the virial mass per unit length, and we see very small ratios of the envelope pressure to the filament pressure. But in some cases, for example, filament B, we see the inner filaments are very consistent with observed values. These solid black and gray squares correspond to observations done by Audra Hernandez in 2012. So for the outer and inner filaments of that infrared dark cloud. So just to summarize, we showed the results of this 0.1 parsec resolution simulation of a patch of a disk galaxy, and we found these mean quantities for a number of different structural and kinematic properties. And basically what we conclude is these filaments have collapsed to unrealistically high densities with highly disordered kinematics. And we think that we need some processes to inhibit the fragmentation of these filaments. And we think some combination of magnetic fields and feedback will help us do that. And this is some work that Sven van Loo is working on now with the running this simulation region with magnetic fields. So this is the unmagnetized case, and this is with a field of 10 microgauss. So you can see in the magnetized case, there tends to be more long, thin filaments and slightly less fragmentation. And we're currently working with Roman on starting a run with feedback included. So hopefully with these three cases, we can determine what role each of these processes play in determining filament structure and dynamics. And I think I'll end there.
Thanks, Mike. So any questions on this? I have one.
Yes.
So can you back the slide?
Yep.
So
which slide is
it? It's summary actually. So,
okay.
Do you think one extra thing here should be undeveloped turbulence? Because you're basically going from a 6 parsec resolution, right, in Elizabeth's.
Right, 8 parsec, yeah.
Yeah. And then suddenly you're reaching 0.1 parsec. So you're suddenly just dissipating all the thermal energy. You don't have developed turbulence, right, to support these systems. So could that be a reason also that it's just free falling or forming a years and then?
Yeah, that definitely could play a role, and I think we'd expect it to. So yes, that could be a third point we could explore.